Welcome to Wednesday's weekly training for all your training and information needs. This week's training will be Making Every Adult Matter, MEAM, delivered by Helen Chicot from Rochdale Borough Council and Tabz O'Brien from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you, Sarah. I just would like to say it's really great to see you all. It'd be great if you can introduce yourself in the comments, just because I'm nosy more than anything else. Just like to know who I'm talking to. And also in the comments, while Tabz is talking, I'll look down them. So if you also want to put in anything along the lines of why you've come today, anything you're particularly interested in, anything you're particularly passionate about, I'll keep my eye on what's being said, as well as any specific questions. Just keep firing them through as we go. So I'm really pleased to be here today, and this is quite an exciting new format, which is great. And very pleased to introduce Tabz O'Brien, who, as Sarah said, works for the Combined Authority and is our MEAM coordinator. So we're going to do this as a Q&A kind of approach, where we're going to kind of cover what MEAM is, what's happening across Greater Manchester and nationally, and also what our plans are in Rochdale. You will get invited to an event, so it'd be really good, Hayley, if you could keep a record of who's here so that we can automatically invite everybody to an event that will follow from this. And also, if there's particular things that you can do to contribute to that event, I'll be inviting you to do that as well later on. So, so that would be great if you're up for getting involved. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Tabz now.
Hello.
Hi. Are you all right to tell us who you are and what you do and a bit of background, please, Tabz?
Yes. Would you like me to share my screen now, or?
Yeah, go on then. Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Tabz O'Brien. I am currently on secondment for a 3-year period with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. I think I've met a few of you before, so apologies if some of you are kind of MEAM experts already, but I'm sure that there'll be some new things to think about and learn, and I'm really excited for the question and answer session. I'm just going to work out how to share my screen. Has that worked?
Yes, it has. There we are.
Yeah, has that worked?
Fantastic.
Amazing. So I'm going to time myself. So there is a lot of time for question and answers, and Helen, please do stop me because I can talk about MEAM for quite a while.
There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. So this is focused on Making Every Adult Matter, MEAM, in Rochdale. I'm going to firstly run through who the MEAM Coalition is, what we do nationally, what multiple disadvantage is, and then move on to a bit of what our framework covers and how it could be helpful to Rochdale and all of you in terms of getting involved in the MEAM network in Rochdale. Does that sound okay with everyone?
That's great, thank you.
Amazing. So the MEAM Coalition, we're a coalition of national charities, including Homeless Link, Mind, Clinks and Collective Voice. We've got over 1,500 frontline members. We formed in 2008 because we realised as national charities that we were lobbying government and local government around multiple disadvantage. And saying you can't just focus on homelessness, you can't just focus on substance misuse, you can't just focus on mental health. A lot of these issues happen together and you need a joined up, coordinated approach. But then we reflected on ourselves as the charity sector and thought, oh wait, we're not doing a coordinated, joined up approach. So therefore MEAM came into fruition to bring all the kind of siloed charity bodies together to kind of coordinate around this space. What do we mean by multiple disadvantage? So we're talking about people who have several problems at the same time, several things going on. They've got ineffective contact with services, and they fall through a lot of gaps in services and systems. I don't know about any of you guys, but definitely during COVID, I've seen this quite a few times. I was on call on Sunday around hotel emergency provision, and there was quite a lot of not my problem situations going on, from kind of like unsafe hospital discharge to police kind of discharging to the street, and people kind of bouncing around those services and systems, but no one, or the system, not taking ownership really to support that person in terms of what they need. People tend to be known by everyone, as I've just said, on a lot of people's radars, whether that's services or councils or police or hospitals, but considered hard to reach and not my responsibility. So as I've said, people face a combination of problems, including, but not limited to, it's important to note as well, but the kind of ones that we concentrate on are homelessness, substance misuse, contact with the criminal justice system, and mental ill health. We have done quite a bit of work recently on how multiple disadvantage is gendered and raced, and we know that a lot of stigmatization, social inequalities and discrimination can compound people's and contribute to people's experience of multiple disadvantage and experience of ineffective contact with different systems and services as well. We also know that trauma, abuse and neglect in early life are, well, the people's likelihood of experiencing multiple disadvantage increased by these experiences, and also material deprivation and poverty. So that's Lankelly Chase's quote around how they define severe and multiple disadvantage. Recently, Agenda, who are a national organisation focusing on women and multiple disadvantage, did a piece of research with Lankelly Chase, and they looked at how victims of interpersonal violence and abuse can also be an extra kind of focus of multiple disadvantage as well, and how it does play out differently for women. So you can see they're involved in sex work that often gets missed out. Okay, so what are the systems we are working with? Don't worry about taking in this diagram. It's supposed to look confusing. I've put it there just to kind of show and visualize how confusing the system is that we're working with it within, and that we're ultimately trying to change through this work. So at the moment, these are the kind of policy environments around reoffending and rehabilitation, substance misuse, housing and homelessness, and mental health. They're just four. So if you bring kind of like domestic violence and other areas of work into that, it looks a lot bigger. This is a diagram from Nottingham City Council, so you can see the national picture and then how their decision making and commissioning processes kind of link to that. I think in Greater Manchester it would be a much kind of bigger diagram, because you've got 10 boroughs, but then you've got overriding boards and commissioning processes as well. So yeah, so that's the system we're working with and trying to change. It's complex and it's hard, and that's why we need to come together as a partnership to do this work. This is a slide that predates MEAM coming together as a coalition. It shows someone's experiences of services from 2007 to 2010. On the top line, it shows unplanned crisis interventions with mental health services, and also missed appointments with mental health services. Underneath the line, it shows contact with the criminal justice system, including prison stays and being taken into custody. I think it's a real kind of portrayal of how that messy, complex decision-making system plays out for someone on the ground. And this is just two areas. This is just mental health and criminal justice. If you add all the other things that is going on in someone's life, that's a very complex, messy picture with a lot of different support services involved, possibly. But I think the main thing about this is that it's crisis intervention and also negative interactions with the system, and not planned preventative support that can have good outcomes. The impact for the system and the individual is obviously going to be a re-traumatization for the individual. They're in the exact same place in 2010 as they were in 2007, but with a lot of different interventions going on. So that's going to re-traumatize and lose someone's trust in the system as well, that it's going to have any change and any impacts. The emotional impact on the workers as well that are supporting that person is something to kind of be considered. Also, the financial cost to the system of all those interventions, that nothing has changed. So all of that is a kind of a point of influence to kind of hold. And so much more. I think the main one obviously is that this person hasn't had opportunities to have a fulfilling life, and they're in the exact same position, and the system hasn't worked and the support hasn't worked for that person. Okay, so this plays out a bit more, but not in graph form. So if we take any one of these circles, we could probably isolate what the system's issue is, what the barrier is, and maybe try and do something about it. But when someone is experiencing multiple different things at the same time, you have to look at the whole and the whole experience, and you need to come together as a whole system to try and change those systems barriers. So this is just a really quick kind of diagram to kind of show how it all interconnects. So Eileen is released from prison and has nowhere to live on release. She has social services appointment to discuss contact with her children and a probation appointment on the same day in different parts of town. And this happens all of the time. In Greater Manchester, I've heard it quite a few times where even within the same local authority, appointments are given on the same day at the same time for two different issues. Sorry, I can't see this next. Oh. So Eileen spends all of her discharge grant getting across town to the two appointments. At both appointments, she is forced to retell the story of her children being removed from care. This comes up so many times, people saying how they have to retell and be re-traumatized by their story over and over again by different parts of the system. Facing no income for several weeks and experiencing re-traumatization from the day's events, Eileen returns to stay with her ex-partner. In exchange for staying with her ex, she is forced to shoplift, she is arrested and recalled to prison, and the cycle starts again. So if you concentrate on, for example, spending discharge grant getting across town to two appointments, and you can sort out a bus pass, that still isn't going to change what happens to Eileen in the end. Okay, so this piece of research was done in 2015. A lot of the data comes from pre-austerity, so I don't like sharing this graph too much because obviously austerity has had a big impact on numbers of people who are experiencing multiple issues at the same time. As we know, like material deprivation impacts on people. But these are the numbers that Lankelly Chase and their Hard Edges research in 2015 showed in Greater Manchester. So they said that 4,430 people in the combined authority area are experiencing a combination of homelessness, substance misuse and offending in any 1 year. And that breaks down to local authority area. As you can see with Rochdale, it's quite a lot higher than some of the other areas. Manchester is obviously the top. These numbers are not right now. I think we all know that from our experience.
Yeah.
I think
I'll just chip in there. Yeah, we've got at least 1,000 that we know of. So yeah, and I'm certain it's higher in other areas as well. So it's not an issue that's particular to Rochdale, but there are particular issues in Rochdale. And yeah, so it's 1,000 that we know of, and we do know that there are more as well. It's just that we haven't necessarily got access to that data. Yeah, you're right, Javid. I can see what you're saying. Not everyone comes into contact with services, and that is a massive issue. Or you only get one bit of the story because they're just coming into one bit of the system and falling between the gaps in the others. So yeah, just so you all know, we are aware it's much higher.
Yes, and also the research hard edges did concentrate on men. There was a gender. People kind of questioned on where are all the women basically in this report, because women face multiple disadvantage and, as you said, come into contact with services in a different way. So instead of rough sleeping and being quite visible, might be sofa surfing or partaking in sex work. So there's a lot of things that this report didn't cover in terms of people's experiences, so the numbers are likely to be a lot higher. Okay, so the MEAM Coalition, as part of our work to try and change the systems, both nationally and locally, work with over 40 different areas to support them to design and deliver better coordinated services and change systems for people. So these are all the areas that we're working with at the moment. You can see Greater Manchester is on there as an area, because Greater Manchester are the only combined authority area who have paid for a role around MEAM. So my role is paid for by the combined authority to come onto common to support any Greater Manchester local authority area that wants to do work around multiple disadvantage and try and coordinate support and change the system for people, which is why I'm here with you guys today in Rochdale. We developed I'm just going to check in on the time actually, 1 second. How am I doing? 13 minutes, okay, better. Hurry up. So the MEAM Approach is a framework that we developed with local areas and did a lot of testing around what works when you are pulling together a partnership and a coordinated approach to system change for people experiencing multiple disadvantage. So after a lot of design with local areas and people with lived experience, these are kind of 7 areas that we came up with. And I think local areas find it useful to have a bit of a tool to think through when they're starting this work, to kind of put things onto. A lot of these things you will already be doing, but they might be in different parts of the system. So it's about kind of bringing that together as a whole systems approach. Okay, so this can be also split up into kind of 3 parts: getting started, having the right people at the table, a shared understanding of the problem and what's going on in Rochdale, understanding what the intervention is and developing kind of coordinated and flexible responses to people within the system, and sustainability and systems change, making that work sustainable. So again, with COVID and the emergency response, there's been a lot of systems flex with individuals that I've personally seen where we've worked outside of boundaries and outside of barriers. However, that hasn't changed the system. It's not sustainable because we've not made that policy change to impact people going through the system going forward, if that makes sense. Okay, and key areas of linkages with the MEAM approach and what Greater Manchester are already committed to through their public service reform and their white paper is around collaboration and partnership and shared responsibility and ownership of the issues, person-centred, strength-based and trauma-informed approaches across the system, transformation and systems change, a place-based area-wide intervention and system change, and support for people in GM who need it most. Okay, so I'm not going to talk through every single element of the 7, but I am going to share this presentation with you after. I'm just going to read out the title on the first line and you can kind of read through the rest. So the first element is partnership, co-production and vision, having the right people at the table, a culture of co-production and a shared understanding of the problem and a vision for change. And I think this, and Helen will say the same, is probably where Rochdale are at the moment, and the work that we want you all to be a part of, kind of setting that vision, making sure people with lived experience are fundamental to what we do and how we change the system in Rochdale, and making sure the right decision makers are bought in so that they that we can change the system as well. Okay. So agreeing a clear referral and selection process for intervention. This is around kind of making sure that we know that people who are experiencing multiple disadvantage in Rochdale have support and have coordinated interventions, whatever that might look like on the ground. So there's quite a bit of work to do around that. Coordination for people and services, individuals and services, brokering engagement together, hands-on support that can help people facing multiple disadvantage navigate those systems. Okay. Flexible responses from services. As I said, we've seen quite a lot of this during COVID. This could be kind of cultural, strategic, it could be around commissioning, it could be economic, it could be legal, but we want to make sure that everyone is thinking flexibly about how they support people experiencing multiple disadvantage. Seeking continuous improvement in local services, so service improvement and workforce development. This is around making sure that staff are kind of trauma-informed, we're working in strength-based ways, that we're inclusive, that we're continually thinking about how to develop services and working together. Could include co-location of services and use of peer support. And this is around kind of evaluation and measurement of success. How do we know that what we're doing is having an impact for people and their lives? And how do we know that it's changing the system for people in the future who are going to experience a lot of different things at the same time as well? Okay, nearly done. Just wanted to quickly kind of say I've been in post since September. Oh God, that's gone very quickly. And come across a lot of different phrases that are used across the 10 local authorities to mean the same thing. And this is slightly an issue because everyone's talking about it in different ways. So we can't raise it up the policy agenda and kind of make it into we want to do something to change the system for people who are having ineffective contact and not getting the support that they need. So some of the wording is complex needs, complex lives, multiple deprivation, complex dependencies, frequent flyers, people going through the revolving door, etc., etc. So there is an understanding that people aren't getting the support that they need, but we need to move it and shift it so that we're concentrating on what they actually want and a person-centered approach and how we change the system from that. Okay. In order to shift this balance, we need to stop doing kind of reactive and unplanned interventions, as I showed on that graph at the beginning, and move to more preventative services and coordinated support. And if we can make the GM model work for the most multiply disadvantaged people, we can make it work for everybody and we can change the system for everyone. Just going to end really quickly on reiterating that this is about systems change, and I'm sure Helen will reiterate this as well. There's no agreement on what systems change is, and there's different ways of approaching it depending on who you are, what your place in the system is, what type of power you have in the system as well, and the issue you're responding to. So for a minute, if you could just consider what you see on this picture. I'll ask you all to shout out if you see a duck or a rabbit.
Time to unmute.
Yeah.
Duck.
Rabbit.
Oh, see a rabbit?
Duck.
See a rabbit here?
Both at the same time.
Both of them. See both of them, yeah.
Wow, that's good. Okay, so that's just a diagram really to just say that you're coming from this at a different kind of positionality in the system, whether you're a frontline worker, whether you're a commissioner, a decision maker, someone who's actually living that system, someone with lived experience. You're seeing it from a different angle, you're concentrating on a different part of that system, but we're all needed to see the whole picture, and we all need to recognise that we're coming from it at a different angle as well. And this is my last slide, you will be happy to know. The system is powerful, it's got established ways of working, as we saw in one of those first diagrams. It's really complex. Every time I get my head round a governance structure or a decision-making structure, it changes. And the current government likes to change that a lot, as we've seen this week. So it has established ways of working, networks and relationships, and it's backed up by policies, procedures and laws that embed existing ways of doing things. it's also cultural. There's a lot of cultural things that we can change, and that's embedded within the system. It's a big fish that sometimes seems really scary and overwhelming. This is my slide, sorry. But working together, we can make that change, and that's the big fish, and that's all of us in Rochdale as the MEAM network trying to get hold of that big fish and change the system for people who need it most. And that is me. Thanks very much, everyone. I'm going to hand back over to Helen.
Okay, thanks, Tabz. That was a really great overview of the whole thing, and I could see the comments popping up more quickly than I could respond to them, but I'm really encouraged by the comments. Even, you know, the questions, obviously we'll answer them, but the fact that you're asking these questions, there's clearly a massive amount of insight here that we need to draw on. So I'm just going to tell you, sort of answer some of your questions in terms of what we're doing in Rochdale, and try and pick up some of those specifics as part of that. But before I do that, I'm just going to quickly tell you kind of what we're up to, and I'm going to do that super quickly. So essentially, using much more professional language than this, Tabz came to Rochdale to check us out as a system and see if we were kind of memeable. And to do that, I'd kind of gathered together a group of people who were involved in working with people who experience multiple disadvantage. And the kind of language that we were using at the time was where we could see evidence of system failure, like every single time, you know, that diagram that we looked at with Aileen, where the system was just failing people repeatedly and not seeing what the real issue was, because the simple thing is she needs a bus pass, but the system doesn't allow a bus pass or whatever. So it was people who see that sort of stuff all of the time. And yeah, so Tabz came and met with a group of people from across the system, including the voluntary sector, and the sort of statutory bits of the system. We already have a couple of parts of the system which we're referring to as MEAM bubbles, which is fantastic because we've got some great evidence coming out of those MEAM bubbles. To be a MEAM bubble, you just kind of have to be aware that you do things in a slightly different way, and so there's no rules to the game of being in a MEAM bubble, so feel free to form your own. But essentially it's where we get different bits of the system working together, and they're driven by an explicit acknowledgement of the values that are driving this, which is essentially about power, where the power sits, where the decision making takes place, and that we're completely sort of failing to listen to the voices of people who've got lived experience. So as we speak right now, the Housing First and Complex Needs group is meeting, and I'm not there because I'm here, but that group is a really good example of a system-wide group of people that that can understand the system from their different parts of it, but they're committed to making sure that they're going to get rid of what those barriers are, those system barriers, to make sure people get what they want and need. So one example of that is that the Housing First system itself is only applicable to a very small number of people. So you have a Housing First panel to allocate Housing First places to a very small number of people, and in the system world, everybody else is not eligible, so therefore they're left. But that panel made a decision very early on that wasn't appropriate for Rochdale, so that panel allocates the Housing First places and coordinates multi-agency approaches to everybody else that comes to that table, so that everybody has got an offer that's meaningful to them, which in some cases is about preparing people and kind of joining up the system around those cases. And then we get spin-off multidisciplinary teams, which are either based in a locality, working around a system in a locality. They're known as place teams, or they're multidisciplinary case teams, which can be, for those of you who work with this sort of statutory bit of the system, it can sometimes get to MDT level, we sometimes call it, which is where there's a lot of risk. But we do preventative stuff as well, so we'll have multidisciplinary, sorry, not MDT, MRN, but we can have multidisciplinary teams as well without having that kind of risk element in there. Have we still got Lucy Sanderson? She's been and gone, hasn't she? It's a shame she's not here, because she's some of the questions that you were asking, she has cases like that on her caseload. So included in the definitions that Tabz shared with us, there's obviously sex work is a big element of that. We've got a massive cohort of women and families, people who have experienced child criminal exploitation and child sexual exploitation and all of the trauma that goes with that, and the ongoing vulnerability to exploitation that continues into adulthood. And there's some really good kind of peer supported groups of women around that, which I can share an article with you that describes how that works. Yeah, it's a really complex system. I'm not going to talk too much about the rest of it because I think it's probably better for us to use the time to talk about what you think, what you need in order to be involved in this, how you could feel confident to be advocates of MEAM and share that across the system, how the voices of the people that you know can be listened to as part of what we're doing, and what you would need in order for that to happen. So those are things I'm interested in from you, but I can see there's so many questions coming through on the side. So I'm just going to look at some of these practical ones. So housing first, what are the demographic of the panel, cultural competency? That is a question that the panel asks itself. What I would do, Javid, is I'd probably invite you along to come and see.
Okay. So just to double check, actually, this bit out. So we've got Lucy and Helen on this session, right? Yes, bro. Okay. So welcome to Wednesdays Weekly, our weekly seminar / information session in collaboration with the voluntary sector or public sector partners. This week's training will be focused on the Rochdale Walkthrough Test Centre, delivered by Lucy and Helen from the Rochdale Central Place team. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes. So yeah, thanks to Lucy for coming here, because Lucy has been and tested the testing centre, and so therefore we'll be able to talk through the real experience of the test centre. But before we do that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of context. And essentially, the walkthrough test centre, which is what we're mostly going to talk about today, but we will talk about the wider test and trace system, particularly with reference to protected groups and equalities as we progress. But we'll start with talking about the Rochdale Central Walkthrough Test Centre, which is one of the first in the country, and its intention is to learn about how to make a test centre accessible to where you've got quite a large population of people that live within a radius. They're talking about a 1.5 mile radius, but actually it's anyone within walking or cycling distance of Rochdale Town Hall. And the idea is that if people haven't got a car, it's easy for them to get a test in the same way as you would get from a drive-through test centre. So it should be quite driven by equalities and access. But actually, when we came to do an equality impact assessment, we did have some concerns. And so this webinar is partly one of the concerns we want to address, which is about getting key messages out to communities that might not be able to access information in the same way as the majority. So I'm going to tell you what the summary findings of that equality assessment are, and the action plan that we've got about that. And then we're going to move on to those key messages, which I'm going to do as a bit of a Q&A again. Mainly I'm doing it as a Q&A because it means that I can invite people to come and speak about things, and they don't have to prepare, because I'll just ask them a question and they answer it. So then they don't go, oh, I've got to do a presentation. So it'll be hey Lucy, what happened here? Which is easier to do. She's muted. You're muted, we can't hear you. Can't hear you. No. Try your mic as well as your mute button. You've got this thing, and then you've got
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It's really less nervous just being put on the spot, isn't it? Really not.
That's the idea. Yeah, brilliant. So I'll just do a bit of the equality stuff first, and then we'll move into that. So, yeah, so we kind of took a look at using the experience of Lucy and some colleagues in the place team who went to do the walk-in centre. Before they went, we went through some what we call personas. So they're actually real people who we know, who have got multiple disadvantages. To those of you who were in the previous session, they've got lots of things going on in their lives, and there's compounding issues that might be to do with physical access, it might be to do with disabilities, it might be to do with learning difficulties, it might be to do with language or literacy, that compound the existing stuff that's going on in their lives. So we were thinking about, how is that person going to access this? What would they need? What kind of support would they need to make this system work for them? And then we also looked at the kind of the protected groups that you would normally consider in an equality impact assessment as well, such as age and you know, race, religion, all of that sort of stuff. And we came across 3 main issues by doing that. And some of it is that some communities, some individuals are going to need additional support in order to be able to access testing, and also particularly to be able to isolate if they do get a positive test. And that they will need a bespoke offer in order for that to happen. So there's a huge piece of work ongoing about how we do that. But generally, we've got 3 main issues about the walkthrough test centre, which cut across different groups. So the first is that some people, because they can't access information in the same way that other people do, that the majority does, maybe they're digitally excluded or they have language or literacy difficulties, that they might actually end up getting a false negative test. So they are actually positive, but the test has said they're negative because they haven't undertaken the test sufficiently to get enough virus on the swab effectively. If they have a false negative, that could then have a compounding effect if they live in a densely populated community. And that impacts on 3 main equality groups. The first and probably most important in all of this is the BAME communities around central Rochdale. And what could happen if you get one false negative where someone feels confident that they haven't got the virus, they could inadvertently spread that amongst their community and you end up with a spike. So that is the absolute most important thing we need to cover today, is preventing such a spike. The second group in a similar kind of vein is the rough sleeping homeless population, people who live in temporary accommodation, for the same reason that they might come into contact with lots of people and inadvertently spread because they think they haven't got the virus even though they've got symptoms. And then the third group is older people who live in sheltered housing accommodation. So those are the 3 top priority groups. There's also lots of other priority groups in terms of access to the site itself. But I have to say I'm much less worried about that, because everything we've picked up on, we've gone, hey, have you got a seat for an older person to sit on while they're in the queue? And they're like, nope, but we have now, we've got that sorted. Hey, have you got a toilet? Yeah, we have now. So everything that we've asked for, they've done. But what they haven't done is change their leaflet to make it more accessible. Thank you for the translation offer. Fabulous. It is about more than translation though, isn't it? So it's about getting messages out, you know, in anticipation of what, so people are ready to come into the test. People need to be reassured in regard, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So that's what this is about seeing you lot as people who can reach out either in the central Rochdale area or across particular community groups, and perhaps getting some feedback from you as well about what you think of the system. If you want, we can open up the system for people to go and test. So if you've got a particular need in mind, and you or someone you know is willing to go down to the centre and actually do a test, they can test the entire system on our behalf and give feedback, and we'll keep feeding that into the process. I can see questions popping up, so I'm just going to answer a couple of those. So yeah, translations on printed materials in EU languages. What I'm going to do, Kush, is connect you in with the what are they called? The contractor on site. So it says it's an NHS, but it's actually a subcontractor through the NHS. And I'm going to put you in touch with them so you can check whether you're happy with what they're saying they're doing, and then let us know. Is there an easy read version for adults with a learning disability? I understand there is, but I haven't yet seen it. I'm going to put on screen what I've seen so far, but I do understand there is one. And could we add EU language subtitles to the recorded bit to this video, Kush? Do you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking if we could potentially do a shorter edit of this video about the key points, you could add subtitles, or we could explore something else, because videos can be quite effective. A human being talking can be effective.
Yeah, definitely. There is, we could do a shorter version, but also there is an animated video that apparently they have translations of. So again, you can check that out for us. Yeah, bullet points, restart the weekly radio. Yeah, fantastic. That's exactly the sort of stuff, getting information out to people in any method we can, but getting that word out in communities. Of the two key messages in all of this is, number one, testing doesn't protect you. So having a test available, it's not going to make everything better. The most important thing is to not catch the virus. So the absolute key messages about distancing and hand sanitisation and all of that stuff, that still all counts. And then the second thing is, if you have got symptoms or you're contacted for a test, these are the important things that you need to know about the test process. So that's what I'm going to talk to Lucy about. So is that all right for now? And then I'll try and keep my eye on what's coming up in the questions, and we'll leave as much time as possible. Yes, we will share the video link. Okay, so Lucy, so the first thing is, I'm going to share this with you all, so you don't need to write this down, but the very first part of the process, and we have had to protect this in Rochdale. They were going to put it into a kind of a nationalised system, and we've said no, we want to use the contact centre in the council, because we have people who speak community languages in that team, and because they're connected in with the local community hubs. So if people, if they're picking up additional needs or support needs that people might have, they can link them in instantly with local support. So they ring a free phone number, which is 0808 196 4100, and we'll share that with you afterwards. And so the first thing I'm going to do is ask Lucy what it's like to make the call and what happens when you call the contact centre.
You ring the number. We've done it a couple of times, a few of us. So I didn't have to wait because I rang quite early in the morning, but somebody had to wait. But they put you on hold. It's a system like you'd be used to. The people that we spoke to were lovely and really, really helpful. They ask you your details. Have you got symptoms? And they want then to be able to take some, ask you if you've got a smartphone, and they want to be able to email you a confirmation. So you do need to have an email address. If you haven't got that, there is some help with that, but that's the process they start to go down initially. So I think if you were telling somebody about it, to check that first, because people would, I think you'd get a little bit flustered if you didn't have an email address or be able to access that.
I'll just come in there. There is an alternative system for people who might not have a smartphone, people who might not have an email address, and we're working on a system for people who might not have ID, but they're not perfect at the moment. So yeah, if they were to try and get a test today, it might be really difficult without those three things.
Yeah, and it does. The people who are taking the calls are very familiar, or seem to be, with talking to people over the telephone. It was very easy to do. They do want you to have, like I say, they will talk about photo ID and those types of things, and they tell you how to get to the test centre. You're on the phone for about 10 minutes, so that in itself is quite a period of time, isn't it, to book. So I could see that could be a little bit stressful for people, but they're talking you through the process all the time, so it was quite easy to get to. And then they email you a confirmation and they give you a time, and when I rang, there was plenty of times that you could pick different times. They don't make it very clear on the phone that if you get there too soon, you won't be able to get in to the test centre. They would turn you away. So I think if you were telling somebody about that would be good, because people, if you're anxious, you go a bit early, don't you, because you want to be there on time, and that's not the best thing to do. They don't want people who are not supposed to be there. But ringing and everything, it wasn't, it was quite straightforward. If you had email and smartphone and all those things, I think it would be a little bit different if you weren't familiar with those systems.
Thank you.
Okay.
So yeah, so shall we, has anyone got any questions about the phone part of the system at this point? Yeah, Nasreen?
You know, if they don't have their own personal email, could you use, like, for example, if I could use my confirmation, are we allowed to do that?
Yeah, I can't quite hear what you're saying. You're a bit muffled, but I think you're saying, can you use an alternative email address? You could use a friend's. Yes, you can. Yeah.
Yeah, they told you to do that, but you would need. They would need to see the email. So they asked me to take that phone along or print that email off. Which again, I think you're tweaking that a little bit, aren't you, Helen? With them. But yeah, you don't have to use your own email, and you know, you can take that along, no problem.
Yeah.
Okay. One final question. So what can we currently do with somebody who doesn't have any form of ID whatsoever?
Yeah, I mean, it's at the moment that is a problem, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of why they need ID, because really a person needs a test, they need a test. So just trying to find out, because actually the test site only know the person's name. It's the contact centre who know who the person is. And then it's entirely up to that person how they register online. So if someone hasn't got ID and they haven't got
photo ID.
And why do they need that? So we're just currently challenging that bit of the system. So as things currently stand, it's not accessible to people without ID, but I'm determined it will be. It's not linked to the NHS number. Javid's just asked that. So I don't see any reason why you would need to have ID, because nobody's keeping a record of who's been. Paul's got his hand up.
Just a quick one. I suppose it's important to get the messages across that when a lot of people, especially that we're dealing with, are watching the TV all day, and they get quite anxious about these things, is that some of the messages that have come through are, oh, the test centre, yeah, it's for NHS staff and key workers, and they watch the TV and they think that's what it's about. And also, I suppose it's to make it clear that they don't have symptoms, they're being pre-tested because they're working frontline. So it's making, I suppose it's not getting that blur. I don't know whether I'm making sense here. But...
Yeah, you are. And that's the challenge that our comms team, our communications team are grappling with all of the time. So they have some I think quite accessible key message stuff that they put out on social media. And certainly in the place team, we use those quite a lot in order to sort of spark a conversation with people to get their understanding of the system. Because people's circumstances and their understanding of the system are all unique, aren't they? So, you know, my understanding of the system is related to my own circumstances, and Dave's is related to his, and it's not all the same. So having someone who can help you kind of navigate your thinking and your response and your understanding can be really important, which is why we're here.
And as well, even when I was going without symptoms, I was going testing, and even that is still makes you feel quite anxious. So I think that if somebody was going because they may have been in contact with somebody or maybe presenting having symptoms, I think it would be a whole different experience, and you would definitely feel far more anxious than I did. And I think that made, when I was there and you go into a big tent and it's all very, you know, do this, do that, you do feel anxious. And I was going without symptoms testing it. So I could understand, and I didn't quite understand that until I'd been on that day. And I think it made me think, you know, this would be a whole different ball game if I was coming, because I'd been told I'd been in contact with somebody, and it's made me feel, you know, want to reassure people much more about it.
I suppose it's about, sorry Ellen, I suppose it's about that follow-up as well, because on the TV you watch people and they go, it's taken 3 weeks, and you know, anybody who's waiting for test results on anything, a lot of the people that we do are elderly, and they've been shielding for 13 weeks now, and the only people they speak to is us. So if they're showing symptoms, it's getting them to understand that it's safe to leave the house, or test will come to you. So it's thinking about all different people and how we can support them around this system, I suppose. And it is around anxiety.
Yeah, it is. And a big part of the equality impact assessment is about softening the experience as much as possible. So I'll talk you through some of that later, but I'm just going to answer some of these questions because we're still on the contact centre. We'll move on to the site next. So can non-English speakers communicate via phone? Do they have language line, etc.? Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And that's why we wanted to keep our own contact centre, because we knew that they had that system in place. It should be linked to an NHS number for further treatment, and tracking is easier. You're absolutely right, and it can be, it just doesn't have to be. So you do have the facility to link it into your NHS number. Nazreen has had a personal experience which I could share if we have time. Is that of the actual walk-in test centre, Nazreen?
It's for the test centre in the Etihad Stadium within the first 3 weeks. Yeah, it was.
Well, that's run by the same company, so yeah, go ahead. Give us
definitely.
a quick whiz through of that.
It was a quick, just a short and snappy. My son's got cystic fibrosis, and he was very, very poorly. And initially, nobody would give him any treatment for his cystic fibrosis. It was just a nightmare on its own. So the plan was to get COVID tested. I rang Rochdale. It was a 8-week waiting list. And I couldn't find anything, and Amir needed treatment. In order for him to even access treatment, he needed a COVID negative test. And then rang Etihad Stadium, and we went there. It was a nightmare to find it. We found it, and I could see how stressed my son was. The whole experience was like an apocalypse. It was something out of the movies. It was very frightening. We had masks. We had to, have our passport IDs. We had to take our passport, and luckily we had something. It was a very frightening experience. You felt as though there's something wrong with you, and therefore you go in there. And Amir, my son, came home and he felt, oh gosh, what an experience. But the result did come back within 4 days via an email. So that was a positive. It was a real scary experience, very scary.
Absolutely. The tests are coming back within 2 days now, which is an improvement. And we are doing everything we can to try and make it feel less horrendous. But obviously within the realms of infection control, it does feel like, someone mentioned, it feels like an apocalypse. It looks like an army containment tent. Just going to answer another question. Am I correct in understanding that anyone living anywhere in Greater Manchester can attend this test centre with an appointment? It's for people who can get there on foot. So it specifies that you can't go by car, but there are drive-through test centres for people to access by car. And you absolutely can't go on public transport or get in a taxi if you have symptoms, which begs the question about how do people access a test if they haven't got a car and they don't live in walking distance. And there is another alternative model, which is to have a test posted to their home that they can do. But again, there's going to be issues about making sure they understand the instructions for that. And then we are setting up a process in Rochdale, because we recognise this is an imperfect system, that some people are going to need someone to go to their house and undertake a swab. But obviously there's much more risks and much more cost with that, so we're going to try and minimise. I know, yeah, that is exactly the point that we made, Javid. So Javid has said asylum clients who are supported by Red Cross will look at that tent and it'll re-traumatise them. Completely agree. And so there's a big piece of work going on to try and make sure it feels local and it feels like it's a facility in Rochdale for Rochdale people. So community arts organisations have been encouraged to submit pieces of work, posters or things with positive messages, information about local support networks. Local schools have been asked to submit some artwork. There's rainbows going up, just to try and do our best to make it not feel like a military space. I mean, in some of the test centres, it's actually run by the army as well, so that's a whole nother level of, they've got actual boots on as well. I'm going to move on to the actual test centre itself, Lucy. So we have kindness cards. Let's get them up. Yeah. So the actual test centre itself, would you be able to talk us through, walking up there, what happens, who talks to you, what they're wearing, what you're wearing, all of that sort of stuff?
Yeah. Does everybody know where it is? At the back of the town hall. It's sort of positioned, where the wall is, where the continuation wall at Broadfield Park. So as you approach, you just sort of hover there, because you don't really know what you're doing, but there's lots of people on hand. I was greeted by a guy who asked me who I was and what time my test was, and there wasn't anybody else there when I got there. So you go to the first little bit, which is where somebody is sat sort of behind when there's a computer. They check, they ask who you are, and I think they must have it on the screen behind there because they knew how I was. They didn't seem to check my ID like really closely or any of those things, but I think I was one of the first ones, so, and that didn't feel too stressful. You sort of then follow your way into the tent then, which is quite a little walk, and you walk round and it's really clear where you're going. And then you get to a lady who's sat behind a screen, and there's some hand sanitizer on the table in front. She's the lady who gives you your pack with all your bits and pieces in. And that's when all of a sudden I felt a little bit, oh my goodness, I'm actually here now to do it. That was when I first sort of thought, oh, this is all a bit strange. Everybody's behind a counter, and there's lots of people around, and they've got masks and gloves on, and then you're enclosed and you're in the tent then. So where before you were outside and it was sort of all a bit outside, and you know, I just sort of thought, oh goodness. But there's lots of people, and everybody was very reassuring, so it was okay. You get a bag. At that point, you don't know what's in that bag, and the lady gives you a tissue and says that's to blow your nose. You don't know whether you're to blow your nose there, but I think that's been sorted now. They're making it a bit clearer what it is. And then you get somebody then who follows you and takes you into a little room where it's your room and you're in there on your own. There's a chair and a table with a mirror in front of you, and there are some instructions on the wall, and the door, the opening to your little cubicle, you've got somebody stood outside that cubicle who is hovering around in case you're not really knowing what you should be doing, and then you have to open your bag and start your test then. You're to blow your nose first on this tissue that you're then told to take that home with you. I got very mixed up with the tissue, and I can't remember if I had a tissue or I didn't, so that is a little bit confusing. So before you start and you've opened your bag, you're blowing your nose, which is all a bit awkward in front of somebody else as well. That felt very strange. Anyway, you blow your nose, you open your bag, and you've got your swab in there, and there's a little gauze and a little vial that you have to put your swab in after, and then you've got your instructions. Has everybody seen your instruction booklet? Yeah, have you got that, Helen, to show everybody?
I've got a PDF
Yeah.
which Nadeem nicked when he went for his test, and he scanned it, so it's a scanned copy, so I can send that round to you all to have a look at. And I've also got a copy of what's in the test as well, which I'll send.
Yeah, I could see that it could get a little bit confusing here on in, because there's lots of barcodes that you're scanning and swabbing, and you're all. I was a little bit stressed with what I was doing. The people are great and they can talk you through it, but basically it's you swab your nose first for 15 seconds, and then you put the swab in your throat, and you're asked to swab your tonsils. I've had my tonsils removed, so when I came out, it does tell you where to swab if you haven't got tonsils, but I did get a bit worried about that, ridiculously. I thought, what do you do if you haven't got tonsils? But there is a little note, so if you've got somebody who, I think that would, if you haven't got your tonsils, you just do it at your back of your throat. Then the swab has to go in the little bottle, and you pop it in and you break the bit off and screw the lid. It's a little bit fiddly, but and that everybody's really helpful around, so you sort of got through that quite easily. And then you're putting it in the bag and scanning a code and all those sorts of things. That's a bit tricky. I think if people were struggling with a smartphone or didn't use English as a first language, or you've swabbed your nose and your mouth and you've not got your easy readers on and all those things, I think it could get a bit awkward, but they're there to help you, so you do manage to get through that bit. There's a bin to put some of the some bits can go in the bin, and then you have your bag that you seal up, and then they guide you again to hand your bag in at the desk. You hand your bag and then you go on your way. So it's just, it's not you're not really expecting it. You don't, it's all a bit awkward, but it's, you know, I did it, I managed it. I got a bit mixed up with the tissue and the swab and what goes where, but it wasn't too much of a big deal, and they didn't make me, you know, I didn't have to do it again or any of those things. So, but I think I'm quite savvy with a smartphone, and it is a little bit awkward. My mum, I think, who does have a smartphone, I think she'd struggle, but it was okay. I managed it.
Yeah, just on the swab question, it's one swab with one end.
Yeah.
It's the back of the throat first, and wherever your tonsils were, and it has a picture, you scrape them, and then you put exactly the same thing that you just put down your throat.
You know,
put up
sorry,
your nose.
that's, I was the wrong way around then. It's your throat, then your nose, which is, you just think, oh, do I really?
Ming. And it does make people gag and all of that, and that's quite common. And it is really fiddly breaking the end off. But the key message really is, to anybody who you think might need this messaging, is just take your time. There's no rush.
There isn't, and they're not rushing you, Helen.
Yeah.
They're not rushing you. They were lovely. I had a young lad who was helping me, and he was outside the door, and he made me feel really relaxed. He was lovely, and he was going, it's okay, you know, just try it again, snap it again, and pop that in the bin. And he didn't. What was good as well, they've got really good social distancing going on in there. So anyone who's getting a bit anxious about being near people, especially people who have not been near anybody for months, that didn't make me feel uneasy at all. The tents are very spacious as well. So, you know, I heard some of the things people were saying before, why people would feel anxious, but I think it's very spacious. They've made you know, you don't feel too close to anybody at all. So that was good.
Yeah. Don't feel, if any of you got, you know, when you're doing feedback or any thoughts that you've got, don't feel like you have to be polite about it. This was imposed upon Rochdale, and we're doing our best to make it better. So I'm not going to be offended if any of you have got a problem with anything that's going on. We'll just do what we can to kind of mitigate it. A couple of questions about support. Do you have to go alone, or can you be supported? The official line is that you have to go alone, which also includes any dependent children that you might have and any dependent adults that you might have. So this excludes carers and people with small children and all of that. But the reality is, like with the ID, is that they're relaxed about that. So if people clearly need support, they can go with support. So we're told nobody has yet tested that, so I don't know how effective that is.
Yeah, I thought about that, Helen, and I've got somebody who I would definitely need to support to go along and do that. And you know, if they allow that, you could easily do it, because you can be, you know, outside where you have to sit, and you could give really clear instructions. I think it's a shame at the minute they're not allowing that yet, because that would be really helpful for some people to go.
Yeah, they are allowing that. It's just we've not tested it, so we don't know. You know, what we have got is the security staff are all from Rochdale.
Yeah.
So, because some of the people that we've sort of tested it through are people who have got kind of lived experience of, you know, sometimes they struggle with anxiety, and that might make them respond in a particular way, and that's the sort of thing that a security guard who doesn't know them might steam in and treat them in a way that's not going to be helpful. So we have got a kind of a joined up town centre approach to how we support people, and if they're coming and they look like they're asking for money off people in the queue or whatever, how they get responded to, just to try and soften that experience for everybody. I think there is a video walkthrough on its way, but I don't think that's yet available, answering those questions. And photographs of the inside will make people feel less anxious. They might, but they might also make people feel more anxious until we've got all of the softer things up there, but I will ask for that. The other thing to mention is that it's not quite in place yet, but we will have staff and volunteers from the Living Well service who will be outside the site providing a greeting function. So they'll be just saying, hi, I work for Living Well, I'm a volunteer. Are you okay? Have you got everything you need? Have you got your mask? Do you feel all right about this? You've got any problems, we can keep on the phone to you and talk you through stuff. There's also an offer for pre-preparation as well. So if people call the contact centre and they say, I'm not going to be able to cope with this, they can have an offer of preparation in advance over the telephone with someone who can do what Lucy's just done, talk through everything, answer every question. And then there's a debriefing facility at the other end if people need ongoing support afterwards, or maybe if it's triggered something. So yeah, so that is about to be in place if it's not already in place.
Some of the things I've been saying to people that I've been talking through this week as well, Helen, because people get, when you're trying to talk people through it, they are very anxious about it. So I was just saying some of the things like, you know, oh, take your jacket, because it felt chilly, you know, when you're anxious and you feel a little bit cold. So I said, oh, it did feel a little bit cold, just take your jacket, and you can change the dynamics of it rather than it just all be about the clinical things that you've got to do. I said, you don't forget your glasses, and pop your jacket on, and you know, have you got your mask and those sort of things, and you can ease people's anxiety about it by just making, rather than it all be about, oh, you're going to do this and that. Because I've taught quite a lot of people through it this week, and the first few were really anxious, and unless you sort of say about the softer things, it does feel very clinical. But you can ease people, you make people feel a bit more reassured by there's lots of people on hand, and you know, it's a little bit chilly, and you don't need your packed lunch, you won't be there that long, but you might be there a while, those types of things. So yeah, because it's not nice,
the workers,
is it?
No, the workers that are there, again, it's really hard to tell because they've all got masks on, blah, blah, blah. So it's worth us saying, you know, if people are anxious, I find it useful to tell people who they are. So they're all from Blackburn, which is just up the road, and they work for a company called Sodexo, and that's a company that's got the contract. So they're all people who've got experience at working with people in a similar environment like the airport or whatever, where you're herding people.
We could do with them to write their names on the mask, couldn't we? That'd be helpful, or decorate the masks or something, because you don't know who anybody is. It just makes it a bit more friendly, doesn't it?
It's anything to humanise, isn't it?
I did that with mine the other day. I was going somewhere and I wrote my name on my mask. I just thought that'll break the ice a bit, because you feel a bit daft, don't you, walking in with, I put my name on and a big flower at the side.
Just on the booth, if you have people who wear face coverings for religious reasons rather than preventing infection, virus face mask reasons, we've asked for a screen to be made available, because the front of the booth that you take your test in is open, and the person who's on hand to help you is stood there, so they could actually, if you took your face covering off, you'd be seen. So we've asked for a screen to be put up, so if anyone's worried about that, that is available. It's apparently fully wheelchair accessible. Again, I've asked for this to be tested, and I'm waiting for feedback about that. But my understanding is it sounds pretty accessible. There's lots of space for turning circles. It's all one single level. It's accessible for people with mobility difficulties who use walking frames, etc. And we've asked for, wherever anyone would need to stand for any length of time, that there'd be a chair available for them to sit down. Joker snood. Terrify people. Right. Can we now, has anyone got any questions before we move on to how do you get your results? No. Great. Let's move on to how do you get your results, Lucy?
They email you and they text you too. I got my results actually. I went at 10:30 one day, and my results were back by 11 o'clock the next day. But maybe that's because I was one of the first ones to go. So it was really, really quick, and it's quite easy. You know, it's really clear what you've not got COVID-19. So they came through quite quickly.
If someone had a test and it came back positive, they would be contacted by an NHS contact tracer. So then that's a whole nother bit of another system. and again, we have very little influence on that bit of the system. But essentially, just before we move on to that, the key thing is preventing a false negative. So it's the swabbing is the most important thing above all else, is that they have to get the swabbing. How long is it that they're swabbing for, Lucy?
15 to 20 seconds.
15 to 20
10
seconds.
to 15 seconds up your nose and 10 seconds in your mouth.
So you've got, but that's the most important thing, is that the whole purpose of this is to make sure that they've got any virus material that they've got in their body is on that swab. So if there's one thing you say, it's don't get the virus, keep your distance, wash your hands, wear your mask, and make sure you properly swab yourself. Yeah.
They're not telling you that either, Helen. They're not overdoing that in there. So I think that's what I've been telling people this week. You know, swab more than less.
Yeah, overdo it, definitely.
Yeah, over stick it up your nose.
And get snot on it. You know, it's disgusting, but get your snot on it, because that's where the virus would be. Yeah, sorry about that. It doesn't test if you have had it. No, Sarah. This is the have you currently got it? Not the antibody test. That's a whole different, probably another hour session. And again, there's massive inequalities in that bit as well. So Lucy's described what happens if you haven't got it. You get a lovely, reassuring communication to tell you that. If you have got it, you'll be contacted by an NHS contact tracer, who essentially will be asking you who you've been in contact with, and they will also be telling you in no uncertain terms that you have to isolate. And for I think it's 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever. Yeah, that is going to be a problem for some people. That's where our community response hubs are going to be kicking in again, to try and do everything they can to keep people at home who need to be. It's not just a matter of food. For some people, it's medication. For some people, it's alcohol and drugs, that actually, if they were not able to have illegal drugs or large quantities of alcohol, that they would withdraw dangerously, and that would have a health impact on them. So there's a whole piece of work ongoing about what these different groups are and how they can be supported to isolate, because people who can live quite independently in a world without a pandemic can't live independently in an isolation setting. So there is a piece of work that's differentiating these different groups and what they might need, and basically what we've got is networks of support, so that the minute we hear about a case that needs support to isolate, that we will activate that network of support. So if they've got children, they go down a particular route. If they've got multiple disadvantage, they'll go down a different route. If they've got a learning disability, etc., etc. So again, any thoughts that you've got on that, any concerns that you've got on that, please, you can talk now about that, or get in touch with us if there's things that occur to you that you're concerned about. So the council gets informed. Do you mean the council gets informed if someone's positive or negative?
Yes, that's what I wanted clarification on.
Yeah, no. All the council does is collect the name of the person and informs the test centre that a person of that name is arriving at that time. And that's what I think the ID is needed for, to confirm you are who the name is, in which case I don't think you need photo ID or anything formal at all. And in fact, in some cases, if someone doesn't have ID and it's just as simple as confirming the name, we could do that informally. Is your GP notified? If you register on the system and you include your NHS number, you have the facility to notify your GP. If you don't want your GP to be notified, you don't have to. So it's up to you. Yeah. Feel free to switch your mics off mute and just ask. I'm quite happy to have a free for all.
Just one question, Helen. You know, people who are in wheelchairs and who require a carer to push their wheelchair, what will happen with them? I'm presuming they'll be lenient for something like that.
Yeah, that's what they're telling us. Yeah. So if someone's come with someone pushing them in a chair, presumably they have an arrangement in place where they don't have to socially distance. They might live in the same household, etc. So in that case, that unit of people functions as a single unit and is allowed into the site. There's other people who might need you know, support for other reasons, might be someone with a learning disability or whatever. But if it's just hard for people to get there and they'd be terrified and it's overcomplicated and the mobility difficulties also affect the hands, and we'd just get someone to go out and test them to make it easier for them. So yeah, we don't want to put people through, you know, just to force the accessibility on a site.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard on the grapevine people are reluctant to go and get tested because they feel that we're going to go and catch it there.
Yeah,
themselves, and they don't want to talk about things like that. There's many people who just probably got the common flu, but they're suspecting they've got COVID, but they want to keep it a secret just in case they're put into a certain category. I find that's going on quite a lot as well. Fear factor, yeah. And
there's people who, you know, in some of the community that's within that proximity, there are people who believe the virus doesn't exist and the whole thing's a conspiracy. So really for us, as far as we're concerned, as long as we're making that system as accessible as possible, so they don't have to give their ID, they don't have to give their NHS number, but they can get a test for their own health and well-being, that's all we're bothered about.
Excellent. I think we needed this. Thank you.
This isn't the only equality issue to do with the pandemic. So if there's other equality issues that spring to mind,
start, Helen.
Yeah, I know. But I just think we can't emphasize that point enough. We're living in an imperfect world with an imperfect system, and if there's anything that we can do, we want to know about it. So, you know.
What options have people from Haywood and Middleton got? Because they're considerably further away.
I know, or someone in Oldham or Trafford. Yeah, absolutely. There are drive-through facilities, but there are not many walk-through facilities. We have just heard they're about to put one up in Oldham. But yeah, that's not going to serve people from Haywood or Middleton. So yeah, it would be the, if you can't get to a drive-through, it would be the order a test and they'll send it to your home. But in many ways, if people live alone, they need much more support with taking that test properly and not getting that false negative. So it might be more accessible in terms of getting there, but it's not in terms of making sure you do the test properly.
Okay. Interesting. I can't think of any questions at the moment, but I'm sure some will arise later. But am I right to presume we're the only ones who've got the walk-in centre at the moment?
In Greater Manchester, yes.
I think that's something to shout out about.
Well, it isn't if it's not accessible.
Well, you're making it accessible, aren't you? So you're doing the best you can.
We are.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are very concerned about this. Yeah.
But that is a positive, though, and we need to highlight on the positive as well that people are trying to make an effort. Yeah, that's good. Okay.
So in terms of language, next steps, Kush is going to have a look at the stuff, and I'm going to put you in touch with the site manager in terms of the European language translations. I've put the link to the website with the video on this group. You all know who I am. If anybody that you know or you yourself want to go and test the test centre, you can call that number and just say you're helping the council to understand the accessibility. So you or anyone you know can do that and let us know what your feedback is. Yeah, or if you want us to let them know in advance, that's fine as well.
Helen, maybe you could send the leaflet out, because what I'm thinking of trying to do, because there's so much information out there and so many good positive projects, but the information's not getting to the community. People aren't aware of what's going on, and I suppose the changes are so rapid as well, they're just not keeping up to date. So I think maybe, Sarah, moving forward, we could do a weekly bulletin of, you know, highlighted points or positives in our community, where I think I need to go back onto the radio. So maybe that'll be good.
Absolutely, about the radio, and also anything we want that goes in the community response update. So this information can go in there that Kerry, because that's where we have our highest number of people engaging. So we have about 40 people that come to the section, and they all represent organisations, which is great. And just encouraging them to spread it.
Kush, you put a hand up.
Hi, Helen.